Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 15 worst episodes of Babylon 5. So this video is being done in the conclusion of my coverage of Babylon 5, where I have covered every episode of Babylon 5, one season at a time. So I'm doing a series of videos now to say my favorite and least favorite episodes and my favorite and least favorite characters of Babylon 5 in order to wrap up my coverage of Babylon 5. So I have, I'm not trying to do any sort of time constraint here or make this concise. I'm just going to babble on as much as I feel like, as I consider this video more of a conclusion or continuation of my coverage of Babylon 5, which I would recommend you checking out. If you haven't checked out already, I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description below. So as for, so I did the same thing with Star Trek Voyager. I covered every episode of Voyager, one season at a time. Then I did a series of favorite and least favorite episodes. And then I did a favorite ranking of all the seasons of Voyager. But for Babylon 5, instead of doing ranking the seasons, because ranking the seasons is pretty simple, like season 1's the worst, season 5 is the second to worst, and then season 2 is the third best, and season 3 is the second best, and season 4 is the best. I mean, that's pretty simple. Most people agree with at least a close version of that, so I didn't really see a need to rank the seasons. But with Babylon 5, I want to actually rank the characters, because I went back and watched my review of season 1 of Babylon 5, and I said the characters were my least favorite thing about the show. But as the show went on, I got to season 3 and 4 where the show got really good. I got more into some of the characters where others still didn't work for me. So it would be interesting for me to get into the least favorite characters, but I'm going to save that for later. First, let me start with my least favorite and favorite episodes. And with Voyager, I did a top 30 worst episodes and then the top 50 best episodes. For Babylon 5, I'm actually doing a top 15 worst episodes and a top 30 best. Main reason for that is because, while there's less episodes in Babylon 5 only had 5 seasons and not 7 seasons like Voyager. But also, like, for me personally, I found Voyager was a very, it was a very polarizing show. Like, it had lots of really bad episodes and lots of really great episodes. Whereas with Babylon 5, in my opinion anyway, there aren't as many great episodes as there were with Voyager, but there also aren't as many terrible episodes as there were with Voyager. I know some hardcore B fans would disagree with me and say all the episodes are great, but I wasn't quite as impressed. So I can sort of sum up the worst and best episodes with a fewer number in that. And plus, I don't think these videos will be as long. Like, my top 50 best episodes of Voyager went on, I had to do it in 2 parts. It went on for like 3 hours. I don't expect these to be as long because I really don't have as much to say about Babylon 5 than I did with Voyager, because Voyager had strong feelings both ways, both good and bad, whereas here I don't really have as much strong feelings or strong things to say. Now, this video is going to be for the 15 worst episodes, so I'll do the best in another video, and then I'll do the characters in another video. So I do have to give, I always feel I need to give a disclaimer, although this disclaimer is often ignored anyway. Whenever I do a video about the worst of something, you know, I always get comments or people saying, why do you hate the show? Blah, blah, you hate the show so much. And sometimes they're not necessarily saying you hate the show, they're just calling me names and, like, insulting me because I don't like certain things, which, you know, I know no disclaimer is going to stop that, but I still want to make it clear that I don't hate Babylon 5. I did, if you see my reviews, you can say I did like it overall. I put it in my top 20 favorite science fiction shows of all time. It beat out a lot of my other favorite shows, a lot of other good sci-fi shows. So, even though it's not in my top 5, like a lot of hardcore B5 fans would have it, it's still in my top 20. So I still do think very highly of Babylon 5 overall, and I would recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it to watch it. Although, if you haven't seen it, you shouldn't be watching these videos, first of I'll just make that clear. But yeah, so I do like the show, but this video is for me to get into what I didn't like about the show, the episodes I don't think worked, and the ones that I think were actually really bad. And as I said, there weren't as many with a show like Voyager, so you could say that as a positive of Babylon 5. And then I'll do another video which is longer, more episodes, so it shows that I think there are more good than there are bad episodes of Babylon 5, because I do, as I say, like the show overall. But so that being said, I'm about to get into trashing some of the worst episodes. Although I think, contrary to my Voyager video where I did the worst episodes, I don't, because with Voyager I had a lot of episodes in my top 30 worst were fan favorites, and I think that's part of the reason why I got so much pushback. Whereas, to my knowledge, although I'm not as connected to the Babylon 5 fan base, but to my knowledge, I'm not really touching on as many fan favorites, and most of these episodes, I think, are generally agreed upon by Babylon 5 fans to be bad, so maybe I won't get as much, but I don't know, maybe I'll be surprised and I'll touch on someone's favorite episode. But you know, that's the way these favorite and least favorite lists goes. Sometimes what I consider the best, other people consider the worst, and sometimes what I consider the worst, other people consider the best, and that's fine. That's just, I'm just putting my opinion out there for those who want to watch and enjoy. Otherwise, you know, just take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot of YouTube channels out there that I really enjoy to watch, which I totally disagree with their opinion on what episodes they think are good or bad. But anyway, as I did with my Voyager episode, you know how I like to rank episodes from a 1 to 10, 1 being the absolute worst and 10 being the absolute best. So with my rankings, my top 15 worst in this case, I will have a little flashcard that pops up that says what my ratings of the following episodes are out of 1 to 10. So we'll have in little sections of what the rating I would give these episodes, and so it's sort of split up in that way. We'll get into my number 15 worst episode of Babylon 5, and that is the episode Convictions, Season 3, Episode 2. And this is the episode where there's a bomber on board, and he wants to, like, blow shit up, and Sheridan has to go and negotiate with him. I can't even remember, like, here's another thing, I don't remember this episode very well. I just remember it not being good. I don't even remember his motivations on why he was bombing shit, because it was kind of either uninteresting or unimportant or both, and I just found this whole storyline really cheesy. And like when Sheridan goes in to negotiate and Jarek Garibaldi's outside with the security team ready to raid, felt like I was so uninterested. It felt really fake. The actor who guest starred, who played the bomber, I recognize him from a lot of other stuff. He actually played a Marine on the Deep Space Nine episode, the Siege of AR-1, whatever the hell that was called, but the one with the Space Starfleet Marines, and I've seen him in a bunch of other shows and films too. I can't recall, so he's not a bad actor, but as I said, sometimes in Babylon 5, even good actors can give bad performances, mostly due to the either writing or directing, which, again, I'm not saying it's always bad. And again, I'll get into my best list where there are examples of really good writing and directing, but sometimes it's a bit shabby, particularly in the earlier seasons. Although this is season 3, but this is like, I think they're still kind of, I don't know, finding their footing. But this one saving grace about this episode, and the one thing most people will look to when looking at this episode, is the scenes with Jakar and Londo trapped in an elevator. Although I don't know if they call it an elevator Babylon 5, but it's an elevator. And those scenes are kind of interesting. And like when because Jakar wants to kill Londo, but he can't, because if he kills Londo, then there's all thousands of Narns will be executed on Narn, but he's in a position where he can simply let Londo die, and all he has to do is give up his own life in exchange. The way he gets all giddy and starts laughing, he wants them to die, and Londo's trying to get out. That was funny. I did really like this. A lot of people love Londo and Jakar together. I'm not as big of a fan of that, which I'll get into in my characters videos a bit more. I actually expect more disagreement in my characters video than I do with this video. But anyway, yeah, so that was cool. Although it was still a typical trapped in the elevator cliche, which is a cliche I'm kind of sick of. It's probably the best you could do with that cliche, though. It really worked, but to me it still didn't save the rest of the episode, because that was only a small portion of the episode. The main episode was focused on this stupid storyline about the stupid bomber, which I just think didn't work at all. So anyway, getting into my number 14 worst episode of Babylon 5, There All the Honor Lies, Season 2, Episode 14. This is the episode where Sheridan is falsely accused of murder. Yeah, like we've never seen this on a serialized or episodic science fiction show before. Like every single Star Trek series has done this a billion times, and then all the Stargate, Farscape, whatever you want. This is just such a cliche we've seen before. But what makes this episode particularly bad is that Babylon 5 itself has done this storyline before. I think it might have been with Sinclair, if I remember correctly, rather than Sheridan. Or maybe it was with Sheridan earlier in the season. I can't remember. But I remember, like, they've already done this storyline where... No, it was with Sheridan. It was the premiere episode of Season 2, I think. Yeah, it was the first episode of Season 2 when we're first introduced to Sheridan. He gets falsely accused of something, and because the Minbari really hate him because he blew up a ship. And this is just a rehash of that. This is only like... 14 episodes later, they're already rehashing a story, and it brings nothing new to it. It's just so boring. And yeah, I think they had this side plot of like this gift shop in Babylon 5. I'm pretty sure it was this episode. A lot of people thought that was funny and liked it. I didn't. I thought it was stupid, honestly. A lot of times, and I'll get into some of this, because usually there's not an episode that focuses on comedy. Like there is like most Star Trek shows like Deep Space Nine, but usually they sprinkle in the comedy in between other episodes. And there are a few exceptions, which I'll get into when I do my best episodes, but for the most part, I don't like Babylon 5 humor. I don't think it's funny. I think it comes off to me as really overly cheesy, particularly like I just watched the scene with Sheridan and has that teddy bear supposed to be him. Like, that was so cheesy. That was not the least bit funny. I don't like Babylon 5 humor. But anyway, for the most part, I should say. But anyway, let's move on to my number 13, Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead, ooh. This episode I remember very clearly. It's Season 5, Episode 8. Oh, God. This episode was just so cheesy. Where this group of forgettable aliens come on board and they want to celebrate the Day of the Dead, so they want to buy a portion of Babylon 5, and Captain Lachlan, I think her name is, she was like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. And so they cross off the section, and everyone in that section ends up going into this weird, like the whole section just disappears, and they go into this weird realm where they talk to the dead. And most of the encounters that we experience in this are really pointless. Like, Mr. Warden shows up to Lanier, and he had actually had no interactions with Lanier previously, so I have no fucking idea why he appeared to Lanier. And then they have freaking Londo's ex-girlfriend or whatever appears, and they just have sex all night. So why is that interesting? It's not really. And then with Garibaldi, this like ground pounder who appeared in one throwaway episode of Babylon 5, she reappears to him, and again, why do I care about her? She's such an insignificant character. It's like, oh, I remember her for that one episode, and why? I don't know. It doesn't really have like significance for Garibaldi. The one saving grace of this episode is the Lachlan, actually. This is one of her better episodes. I think because she would be a bad character, but they do have they flesh out her backstory. She had problems with drugs in the past, and in this episode, someone whom she used to hang out and do drugs with, who died of an overdose, appears to her and reminds her of her past. That is the one saving grace of the episode, because that is actually the one storyline that kind of worked. But everything else, just the whole concept of the Day of the Dead, was so stupid. I did not like this episode. So next we get into my number 12, which is the deconstruction of falling stars. So this this was the season 4 finale. It was not originally intended to be the season 4 finale, because originally the series finale was intended to be the season 4 finale, but when they found out they were getting a 5th season, they pushed that off to be the 5th season finale, so it could be the series finale, which I think was a huge mistake. I think they should have just went ahead and showed it in season 4, but that's digressing. So they replaced it with this episode, which they actually filmed during season 5, but they showed it at the end of season 4. So they filmed it when they were filming all the season 5 stuff, and so that's instantly makes it the worst episode of season 4, because season 4 is so much better than season 5. But the episode itself was it's really silly. It's not even showing casing the main characters, just because season 4 and 5 were in a transition, so they couldn't really continue the storyline without starting the season 5 storyline. So they just did these a series of short stories that would jump first hundreds of years into the future, then thousands of years into the future, then millions of years into the future, when each iteration just got worse and worse. I believe it was the first segment was just a typical news story. It reminded me of watching CNN or Fox News or something, but it was taking place in the Babylon 5 world, where they had the talking heads who had different opinions about Sheridan come on and arguing about him, which is really boring. It's like watching a news show. I don't want to be watching a news show. And then the next segment was even more cheesy, with these academics hundreds of years in the future trying to argue that Sheridan wasn't a good guy or the fault of him, and they're all acting all smug and smart, and then Delenn, who's super old but still alive, shows up and it's how dare you, and that was pretty dumb. And then the next segment, this one was actually probably the best segment of the episode, but it still wasn't that great. It was even more later into the future, where there's a war. I don't know the political landscape, but there's a certain war going on, and this faction, the evil group or whatever, trying to depict Sheridan in Babylon 5, or the originators of the Alliance, as these evil people. So he creates this hologram program. He bases it off their characters, but then he slowly changes them to act all evil, so he can revise history. But before he gets to Garibaldi, the Garibaldi hologram outsmarts him and finds a way to alert the other side to destroy him and kill him, which is, I think that's pretty funny. Garrett is hundreds of years after Garibaldi died, and they still have a version of his hologram that's still being outsmarting people. So that was kind of cool, but I just don't like the further they jump into the future, the further I didn't like this episode, because I never liked that, seeing glimpses. And then I believe it's the next segment, which I really didn't like, is about these religious people back on Earth, where apparently they reverted to a medieval sort of level of technology. And I think I read things trying to explain that it's not that they lost the technology, it's that they chose not to endorse it, and so they have members of the Alliance coming back trying to reignite them, and it was these religious, I don't know, it was really stupid. I thought it was this segment felt really pretentious. This really felt like he had his head up his ass. I really didn't like it. But what was even worse was they had this narration thing at the start of each segment where someone was looking up things in the computer, and at the very end you find out it's a super advanced human from millions of years in the future, and he's just like a Vorlon. He has a Vorlon suit, and he goes and flies off, and after Earth dies or some bullshit. I don't know. It was really, 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 really stupid. Didn't like it at all. Okay, so now let me get into number 11, which is Sick Transit Veer, season 3, episode 12, where Veer is he's accused of like participating in killing off hundreds of Narn. And this episode, as I said when I first reviewed this episode, it's the writers of this episode think I'm a moron. They think I'm an idiot. I don't appreciate being treated like an idiot, because they must think I'm an idiot if they think I'll believe that Veer is participating in slaughtering Narn. And of course you find out at the end he's actually saving them. Oh my god, I'm so shocked! Veer actually being good and saving the Narn? Oh my god, I'm so surprised. So that alone really, really pissed me off. But the episode itself also deals with, like, he gets a fiance, and she's like acting all ditzy and oh, I'm devoted to you, and it turns out she's like incredibly racist. She has a father who's raised racist towards Narns, and she is the one who's participating in killing all these Narns, and Veer's sort of, oh, what do I do? Which I didn't buy, wasn't interested in. I thought that she came off as really cheesy. This whole episode, again, I want to give the writers a big middle finger. Screw you for treating me like a moron. Anyway, that is it. Alright, let me move on to my number 10, which is Grail 17 is Missing, season 3, episode 19. And I'll be honest, this episode would probably be number 1. The number 1 worst episode of the entire show, or at least number 2. If it wasn't for a side plot. It has a side plot in this episode that is actually really good, about Delenn being promoted to like the leader of the Rangers, and Naroon doesn't like it, so he comes on board to kill her, and Marcus like fights him, and even though Marcus knows that he can't beat him and that he'll die, he does it anyway, and he's willing to sacrifice his life. And the fact that he is willing to sacrifice his life changes Naroon's mind, and because it illustrates the kind of devotion that Delenn inspires. So he realizes that she is the right person to be the leader of the Rangers, and seeing that interaction with Marcus and Naroon at the end, when Marcus is like lying in the hospital bed and really like to the point of death, and Naroon's kind of just like praising him for doing that. That was all good stuff. So if it wasn't for that side plot, which is actually pretty good, this episode would probably be my number 1 worst, because the main plot of the episode that focuses on what the title is about, Grail 17 is Missing, is some of the dumbest shit I have ever seen. Alright, so it's like a 13th floor type deal when a Garibaldi is like trying to get to level 17. It's like it's this cheesy mystical stuff that Babylon 5, the worst of it, does sometimes. And so he has to like get in between the elevator, or get the elevator to stop at a certain place in order to get to the right floor. And he goes there and he finds what's his face, who plays Freddy Krueger, and he has like a crazy cult of crazy people, and they're just acting all crazy, and they're like, oh, we're gonna feed you to the monster, and this monster comes around, and, oh, we gotta get the monster. I try to block this plot from my memory because it was just cringeworthy bad. It's almost so bad it's good. It's just so almost, but it's still painful to watch. It's still like, oh my god, what the fuck were they thinking? So even though that subplot's really good, it doesn't stop this episode from being on number 10 on my worst list, because that main plot is just so bad, so horrible. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so now we're stepping it up a notch, getting into my number 2 rated episodes. So let's get into my number 9 worst episode of Babylon 5, and that is The Long Dark. So this is the episode where Dwight Schultz, aka Reginald Barkley, guest stars, and he actually does a pretty good performance, to be fair to him, but the writing sucks. The character is awful. It's like some really monstrous thing. It's like people always say, like, oh, some people were saying Babylon 5, you can't do best or worst episode list because it's too serialized and ongoing, too many ongoing storylines, which I completely disagree with. I'll get into this more when I do my best episode list, because I think there's a lot of episodic. It is more episodic than most modern shows, to be frank. And to be fair to it, it's probably because it was in the 90s, made in the 90s, so it was probably forced upon it to some degree. And so, especially in the first couple of seasons, we did get a lot of episodic episodes. And most of them, not most of them, but some of them were really, really bad. Have nothing to do with the main plot. And this is one. It's just like a throwaway episode with this creature coming on board Babylon 5 to haunt people, and Reginald Barclay can see him. People dismiss him as he's crazy because he's acting like a loon. And then there's some side plot about Dr. Franklin finding some lady who's been in cryostasis for a long time, falling in love with her, and she's never mentioned or talked about ever again, so who cares? And the whole thing with Barclay is just boring. The monster was stupid, so no, didn't like this episode at all. Okay, so we get into my number 8, which some people might be surprised this is only 8 and might expect it to be number 1. And I do admit, I do hate this episode a lot. After all, it's number 8, but not quite as much as a lot of people do, and that is TKO. Yeah, so this is the episode where Garibaldi has his old friend who's like a boxer, and he comes on board. He wants to get into this fighting sport that's obviously supposed to be an analogy for martial arts, and it's kind of being a bit racist towards Asians, the way these aliens are obviously behaving like Asian stereotypes, and they don't think humans should be in their thing, which is obviously kind of a metaphor for how I don't know, maybe they didn't want white people involved in martial arts. I don't know. The whole thing is just really sloppy, really stupid. It's really, I don't know. It's just, just so cheesy. I don't know. Maybe why I don't hate this episode as much as many others is because this is kind of just the typical cheesy. It didn't get into overly offensive cheesiness as some of these other episodes do. And also, it's kind of funny because it's so bad. Anyway, let's get into my number 7, which is And the Sky Full of Stars. So this is the episode where you get 2 ham actors come on board. They kidnapped Sinclair. This is season 1, episode 8, by the way. So they kidnapped Sinclair, and they want him to tell me what you know. The ham acting in this episode. This is why it's so high on my worst list, because first season of Babylon 5 in particular has some really cheesy acting. As I said, it's not the actors' fault. It's more of the way they were directed, and the written dialogue is too theatrical, too melodramatic, too over the top. It just comes off as very low budget, very cheesy. And this episode, in my opinion, is one of the worst examples. I think actually the worst example is the episode, I think it's called Mind War, which is also from season 1. But that's not on my worst list because that introduced Bester, who's awesome in that episode. So it wasn't bad enough to make my worst list. But it's also another example of some really cheesy ham acting. This episode, unlike the other episode, has no positives to it. Setting up the storyline of Sinclair being having been abducted by the Minbari during the Battle of the Line. They know more about it, and there was something, it hints at something more that goes on, that went on between Sinclair and the Minbari, which they kind of had to fast forward through this whole storyline when the actor who plays Sinclair left the show and he was replaced by Sheridan, and they kind of just at the start of season 2, Lanier just dumps exposition that explains all this. So it kind of didn't really go anywhere. It's obvious that from this episode, when they thought they'd have Sinclair for the whole 5-year arc, that they were setting this off as more of a long-term burn. But anyway, that fact doesn't really deflect badly on this episode. It's just because the fact that it is setting up for it is the only interesting thing about this episode. But the ham acting and the cheesiness of it, it just was when they the guy is caught who captured Sinclair, and he's acting all just calm the fuck down and stop being such a drama queen. I couldn't get behind this episode. Anyway, My number 6 is Comes the Inquisitor, which is season 2, episode 21. This episode is not as cheesy as the other one, as some of these other ones I talked about. It doesn't have really bad ham acting. It's just dumb. It's just stupid. Like, okay, so this episode is all about... it's not so much that it's cheesy, but it's just that, again, it's trying to be a bit too much theatrical. And it comes across as, like, almost, like, too much of a play type thing, where you get... Delenn has, Kosh wants to vet her, so he sends an inquisitor to question her, and he's just being like a dick and torturing her and being, oh, so you blah, blah, blah. And I found all this very cheesy, very boring. It's just didn't like it at all. I just seen, it wasn't like cheesy over the top in the way the ham acting was, but it's just still cheesy in the sense of who cares? Like, you know what's going to happen. You know that she's going to defeat the Inquisitor. So I felt there's really fake stakes in this episode. But what was worse, like, this might not be as high as the worst episode. It might not even be in my top 15 at all. If it wasn't for the reveal, I think the reveal at the end is what makes this a truly horrible episode, where they reveal that the Inquisitor is actually Jack the Ripper. Ooh, oh my god. Like, the original series why do people always try to do the shit and make Jack the Ripper, like, supernatural? It's not saying he's supernatural, it's saying that the Vorlon snatched him up after he committed the murders and made him have this internal life of torture, and he has to go around being an inquisitor from them in order to pay off his deeds or whatever. That is so dumb. That is just a level of dumb I can't even get into. So that's why this is number 6 on my list. Anyway, we get into number 5 on my list, which is the Geometry of Shadows. And again, this episode features a somewhat decent side plot with Ivanova trying to negotiate through the Drazi, and this is the first time we really get into the Drazi, where they have this stupid ritual where they have purple armbands and the other one have green armbands, and they just automatically hate each other because they have different armbands, and they eventually try to kill each other. And Ivanova's like, so the only difference of you is your color of the armband. She's like, yeah, so. And I found that to be really effective, really good commentary on tribalism and how ridiculous it is. And I think that actually really worked, although I do think the specifics of the storyline were a bit cheesy, such as Ivanova at the end, like taking the armband off and putting it on someone else, I don't know, and she becoming the leader because she puts on a certain armband. That part of it was kind of dumb. But again, it's the main plot that tanks this episode. And the side plot wasn't enough to save this episode from being as high as it is, because the main plot, I hate it with a passion. So it was about, like, the techno mages, and this is when they introduced the techno mages into canon, and the show is worse off because of it. Although, to be fair, they don't really follow up with this in any form until some of the movies, which I think suck because of it. With the because the whole concept of techno mages basically is they used advanced technology to practice magic. And because all magicians use technology to practice magic. They just use, like, either more older or more modern technology, not like computerized stuff that, wooden things with latches and stuff. That's considered technology. You may not know this, or the writers of the show obviously didn't know this, but they're speaking more of, like, advanced futuristic computeristic technology and stuff to make it look like it's magic, which I suppose it makes sense that there would be people who would do this. But when I talk about magicians today, I'm talking about showmen who puts on the show. These are supposed to be, they're acting like wizards. Like, they live in their own, they're not doing this to put on the show, they're doing this because they want to be all wizardy and put on magic and stuff. And it's so stupid. And this sometimes, like, you can tell a lot of times, sometimes JMS's Lord of the Rings influence shows up in the show a lot, and it becomes very obvious. Now, sometimes it's not too bad, and it actually works in a way for the story. But this is a case where it is a huge detriment to the story, because it's so obvious he's just trying to incorporate like wizards like Gandalf or whatever into these fantasy elements into Babylon 5, and it just doesn't work at all. It comes off as cheesy, and the whole thing about Londo trying to get his attention and be impressed by him, and he ends up like creating like a monster or whatever, and he puts like some thing on his back, and that's supposed to be funny, ha ha ha, but it's really stupid. Yeah, this whole episode's dumb. Anyway, get into my number 4 worst Babylon 5 episode, and that is A View from the Galley, Season 5, Episode 4. So, this is another episode that's episodic with the throwaway storyline with the villain of the week. We don't care about. They don't really get into their motivations, why they're there. They're actually more of a side plot, really, because the main plot is we get to like mechanics, and they're eating lunch, and they're talking about, oh, Sheridan's a pretty good guy, blah, blah. We follow them, and so it's supposed to be like a Lower Decks type episode, like Lower Decks from Next Generation, where you follow the lower, those lower in the tandem pool rather than those are in command, which is an interesting concept, and I think can be done right, like in Lower Decks. But this is an example it was done totally wrong, because they tried to incorporate them into like the main characters and the main storyline into them, and it just felt very contrived. Like the way they were talking about, oh, I think Sheridan, it seemed very fake, and these characters didn't come off as realistic or interesting at all. They felt like the cliche stereotype of the worker class, rather than trying to actually relate them to be relatable, personable. And it's just, this whole episode was just so dumb and cheesy how they tried to incorporate the main plot into this, and they would just have conversations with Franklin which were really like contrived and faked, and the whole episode was a failure. So now we get into the one range, the worst, the absolute worst, and to be fair to Babylon 5, this only encompasses my top 3, whereas with Voyager it was like my top 13 or something. So there's a lot less that I consider as bad as to be absolute lowest rating I can give. Absolute 1, absolute horrible. Anyway, let's get into them, starting with my number 3, Soul Hunter. And this, as I reported, this is the episode this is the first episode I ever saw. I watched pieces of it when Babylon 5 first came out because I was interested in it. Should I watch the show? Boy, did I choose the wrong episode to come in, and obviously my thinking of after watching this episode was, no, I don't want to watch this show. This show's dumb. But to be fair, the show wasn't the show. It was just this one episode with this guy, I want your soul, your soul. It was just so cheesy. It was so cheesy. Guy comes on board, and again, this is like, I think, season 1, episode 2. So this is the second episode of the show. So to be fair to the show, they still hadn't found their footing. They were still trying to work things out. And obviously, like, all the mistakes and bad things about the show's construction just came shining through very loudly in this very cheesy episode about this soul hunter. And this is another thing that will be touched on, like movies and other stuff in the future, which I don't like. Thankfully, they didn't really touch on it in the main canon of the show. But so yeah, I don't know. He goes on board because he wants to kill Delenn and steal his soul, and then another soul hunter comes on board to stop him and work with Sinclair to stop them from doing that. And it's just so dumb, cheesy. Just couldn't stand it. Anyway, get into my number 2 worst of the worst episode, and that is Grail, another season 1 episode 15. I think a lot of people don't hate this episode as much as I do. I really hate this episode. It's just the whole concept. Like, David Warner's in it. He's a good actor. He's okay in this episode. But so many things about this episode was just... Alright, first, let me talk about the villains, like these thugs. It was very felt very syndicated, very bad acting, very cheesy. I didn't buy them as realistic. It's like this stereotypical like hick type. Oh, I'm gonna, and it's just it didn't buy this at all. It seemed really like fake, really staged, and it's like and they didn't seem like criminals, like, and they had this like monster whatever that would come and like feed on people and pretend to be Vosh or whatever, Kosh, sorry, pretend to be Kosh and like feed people, and it's just like, oh my god, that was so cheesy. And the whole thing with Vix was, this actor was terrible who played Jinxie, whatever his name is. That whole concept was really stupid. But main thing, I mean, I'm not even getting the main reason why this episode sucks, and that is the whole thing. The whole episode is about a guy who belongs to a group, or apparently he's the only member of at the moment, who sorry, give me a second, whose whole purpose is to find the Holy Grail. Like, he just thinks it's not on Earth, that it might be across the galaxy, so he goes around the alien like outposts and worlds and like, excuse me, do you happen to know where the Holy Grail is? Who thought this would be good? And how can anyone like look at that whole concept and be like, oh yeah, that's fine? No, it's not fine. It's the pinnacle of stupidity. The Holy Grail, seriously? Like a legend, and from thousands of years ago, and then hundreds of years in the future, he's going to go to different aliens and be like, oh, I was still trying to find the Holy Grail. Just, why doesn't everyone hate this episode as much as I do? How can people give that a pass? Don't give it a pass. It sucks. As I said, like, David Warner himself is not bad, even though he plays that role. But the whole, like, everything around him is just so cheesy and so dumb. And then how he dies and the Jinxie guy takes over. He wears the thing. Oh, I'm now looking for the Holy Grail. Fuck this episode. Anyway, let me get into my number one worst episode of Babylon 5. Which, ironically, like my number 3, also has the word soul in it. And that is the worst episode of Babylon 5, in my opinion, Soulmates, Season 2, Episode 7. Now, maybe I will get some disagreement here, because I haven't heard people trash this episode as much as I am about to. Because I don't like the Centauri. I'm not as big of, like, most people love Londo, which I'll get into more when I get into my characters, which I've been very vocal about in my videos, my reviews, that I don't like Londo. I think he has an interesting character arc. He has an interesting character story, an interesting character arc. But an interesting character story is not the same thing as an interesting character. But again, I'll get more into this when I get into my character things. And I also don't like Veer. I don't like the Centauri. And this episode encapsulates, is like the perfect, if you're wondering, it's like, why don't you like Londo? Why don't you like the Centauri? I present you with this episode. Watch this episode, and it encapsulates everything I hate about the Centauri, and how cheesy they are, how dumb they are, how stupid they had the peacock haircuts, and the women are bald for some reason, and they speak in these like rip-off, horrible European accent wannabe rip-offs. Oh, here, come here, and they act like cliche idiots. And this is a very cliche episode about, they're supposed to, it's interesting because they're introducing his wives, and it's a different system when they have 3 wives. But again, it's just trying to do the, like, play it like a foreigner. Like, there are other cultures throughout history on Earth who have practiced things like this, but it's trying to present it like alien. But they're not aliens. They just have peacock hair and talk like, oh, Veer. That doesn't make them fucking aliens. Anyway, but the episode itself is so fucking painful to watch. Like, I just can't stand it. It's just a cliche where they have these 3 the wives come on board, one's trying to suck up to him and whatever, and be like to get his hidden money, so they're pretending to love him and being like, oh, I'll do whatever you want. And another one is being a total bitch to him, and the other one is like, I think it might be the lady who was on Frasier playing the one who's being a total bitch. But the whole concept of the three women and they going around, and Vera has to juggle them, and it's like, and it's just like this. Let me be clear, this is not at all a case of so bad it's good. This is a painful, this is like ripping at the thumbnails. If you want to torture me, force me to watch this episode, I'll confess to anything. Just turn this fucking shit off. Cannot stand this episode. It's nails on the chalkboard to me, and just the whole three wives thing, and I can't even remember what the fucking subplot of this episode is. I don't care, because that thing just blinds me to it. Fuck this episode. I hope it dies. Never want to see it again for as long as I live. So that is my number one worst episode of Babylon 5. Anyway, that is it. I have gone through my top 15 worst episodes, and if this video really pissed you off and you're like, why do you hate Babylon 5? Wait a couple of days. I'm going to release my top 30, again, 30 double the episodes, best episodes of Babylon 5, where I'll be a lot more positive. I'll get into why I do love this show so much, why I do consider it one of the best science fiction shows of all time, and I'll get into that more. But every great show has its dark side, and I covered that in this video, so I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. As I said, I'll be back in a couple days with the top 30 best episodes, and then a couple days after that, I'll be back with my 10 favorite and least favorite characters of Babylon 5. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also, I do many other videos and other shows like Better Call Saul, Game of Thrones, Star Trek, and The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.